Here.
Mr. McDowell. Mr. Duval.
Present.
Mrs. Bedora. Mr. Devine.
Here.
Mr.
Here.
Mayor Ventura.
Here.
Thank you.
I need to ask him. I know he probably knows.
Yes, ma'am.
I was giving deference to our newest member of the 50 Club. I'm not in it yet.
I know we're a long way off. He's
It's
old. Him and Daniel have got like.
I swear, literally, I got mail yesterday, December 2nd, and had my AARP membership thing. And
Yeah.
they're a
Are you
machine.
serious?
Oh, yeah.
I was 60 for
I took a
AAR.
picture. They are a machine.
Wow.
That is a
They are
deal. You
machine.
need to read every word they put out.
I'm told I can get a free Diet Coke from Hardee's
he's joking.
every time I go. So.
You get senior coffee. My mom says the senior coffee at
Oh, I know.
McDonald's is like the best.
Senior coffee is better than regular coffee?
Well, I guess it's cheaper, so it takes.
They won't give me
You're 50?
They won't give you a senior coffee?
Mine was really wrong.
All these 50 years. Y'all look great for 50. I know Clint and Missy just recently joined the 50 Club too.
1969.
Missy Rose?
I was about the 60s.
Yeah, her birthday was just last week.
Father God, please bless this fellowship. Watch over us as we continue to do your work on behalf of the people, all of the people of Columbia. In your name, amen.
Amen.
And thank all of you too for indulging us as we recognized one of our longstanding employees who's going on to another venture, Ms. Chris Seegers, our grants administrator. We will miss her, but she won't be too far. She's going to be working over at USC. So
Is she paying taxes?
I don't know.
That was for Mr. Rickman's benefit. I was just joking.
What was that?
All right.
We're gonna miss
so-
Chris. She's done
Yeah,
an
she
amazing job for us.
So,
Amazing
Ms.
job.
So, Ms. Wilson, are we posting that position? Are we just gonna, yeah? Because, well, I was just wondering, because for a long time, we didn't have anybody, and just having Chris shows the benefit of having somebody in-house on staff to do that, so.
Absolutely.
It's an important position.
We will, and we'll get, I've already talked to her and Missy Kaufman about getting some input, hopefully from her as we're going through that process. Need a great writer like she is. Okay, with that, we will begin our city council discussion with two items, but two very important items, and we're always excited when we have our federal legislative aides in town from Washington. So we will start with the 2019 federal legislative update, Mr. Ralph Garbushian, Capital Edge LLC, accompanied by Ms. Deborah Dehaney Howard.
And Ms. Wilson, as Ralph and Deborah are coming forward, I mean, I know we all know how amazing Ralph and Deborah are and how much they do for us. And I know that, the mayor works with them more directly than a lot of us, so I think sometimes we take for granted how much they know and how much they do. But I just wanted to share, you guys know I just ran for the board at NLC, and I mentioned it to them in March, just kind of in passing. And before the meeting, they sent me a list of the nominating committee members. They sent me a list of receptions that I needed to go to, just the things I think you take for granted of when you're doing something like that, the connections you need to have. So, and none of that is within their job description. And so I just appreciate them and wanted to say publicly how much I appreciate their help in getting me elected to the board and all the work that I'm going to be doing, but just how much that they think ahead of things that we need that we don't even know that we need. And I just appreciate them so much.
True advocates.
Next year she'll be here saying that damn Ralph and Deborah. They got me on the board at NLC, and now I can't get anything else done.
Well, thank you. And it's always good to be in Columbia. We always enjoy coming down here, and had some good meetings with city staff yesterday and this morning, and a lot of new things to work on. So a lot of challenges, but maybe some opportunities as well. So federal legislative looks really big on that screen in all the capital letters. Federal legislative update. I've tried to keep it short on the PowerPoint, so there's a few handouts as well that. Thank you, Juana. That I have to accompany it. I found it easier to do that than to try to squeeze it into the PowerPoint. So wanted to really quickly, this is just some of the issues I'd like to go through, and if anyone has any questions, I guess, do we do that at the end, or? Okay.
We say that, but they might.
Sure, that's fine. So budget and tax issues, the big thing in the first handout we have is this one here. It's with the chart at the top. And it's just a quick two-page summary. In July, President Trump and the congressional leadership reached a two-year budget agreement. And just by way of quick background, the reason for that budget agreement goes back to 2011. So going back a ways now, but in 2011, you might remember President Obama and the congressional leadership at the time reached an agreement where they created something called the Super Committee. Mr. Clyburn was a member of that Super Committee. And the idea behind the Super Committee was we're going to put together this Super Committee of congressional leaders, and they're going to come up with a package of changes to entitlement spending and to the tax code in an effort to achieve balanced budgets. And they hung a knife over their head. And they said if the Super Committee doesn't come up with such a package, we're going to implement something called the sequester, which would call for deep cuts to discretionary spending over 10 years. Well, the Super Committee did not come up with a package, and the sequester took effect. But the sequester really was as bad as everybody thought, because not only 1 year have we actually had sequester level discretionary spending levels, and that was in FY 2013. Every other year, they've come up with an agreement to lift the sequester caps on discretionary spending. So what President Trump and the congressional leadership agreed to in July was to waive the sequester for FY 2020 and FY 2021. So instead of a deep cut for FY 2020, we're going to see a 4.3% increase in non-defense discretionary spending. And just to put in perspective what that two-year agreement means, that chart at the top of the handout, the bottom line is where non-defense discretionary spending would have gone absent a budget agreement. The top line is what the budget agreement allows for. So that's all a very long way of saying, oh, and the other part of the budget agreement was they waived the debt limit until March of 2021. So that's a nice little gift for the next Congress soon after they take office. But that's a long way of saying that we were looking at pretty steep cuts, once again, to non-defense discretionary spending, which is almost everything the city cares about: community development block grants, home, justice assistance grants, homeland security grants, parks and conservation grants, and so on. So instead, I think we're looking at, and you've all seen this handout most years that we've been here, but this is our funding chart, and it's a department by department look at where things stand in the appropriations process. And as you look at it, you'll see the administration was assuming the sequester and then some. The House was assuming no sequester and a significant increase, and the Senate was just waiting until they reached an agreement. So as you look at program by program, I don't think the House numbers are not likely, but if you kind of look at the House number and the Senate number, a little closer to the Senate number, but I think that's a long way of saying that I think we can expect level funding or even small increases for most of the programs the city cares about. So maybe another $100 million for CDBG, maybe another $100 million for home, probably another $100 million for justice assistance grants, and on down the line. So I think we're in good shape for FY 2020 and FY 2021 in terms of all those programs the city cares about. The latest news, we're now 2 months into FY 2020, by the way. That started on October 1st. None of the appropriations bills were law on October 1st, so Congress passed a continuing resolution to keep the federal government open until November 21st. November 21st is come and gone. They've passed another one to keep the government open until December 21st. So they've given themselves another 3 weeks. On a positive note, just before the Thanksgiving recess, the House and Senate Appropriations Committee announced that they'd agreed on the top line number with the president on non-defense discretionary spending and defense discretionary. The House and Senate Appropriations Committees announced that they'd agreed on how to divide that top line. So half the battle is the top line. A quarter of the battle is then dividing that top line among the various bills. So between now and Christmas, they're going to be trying to iron out the remaining problem, which is, of course, things like whether or not to fund a wall on the Mexican border, whether HHS funds should go to Planned Parenthood, EPA environmental regulations, whether they should be allowed to spend money on repealing some regulations. So still some pretty thorny issues. I think the likely outcome is that some of the appropriations bills will become law before Christmas, and for the rest of the federal government, they'll have to pass another continuing resolution into early next year.
How many legislative days left?
So it's December 2nd, December 21st is 19. Yeah, they generally don't do anything on Monday and Friday. So 12 to 15 legislative days before December 21st.
12 is the number.
Yeah, so not many. As we get closer to the 21st, they're more likely to be in session on Monday and a Friday if they don't have final agreement on the spending bills. Oh, yeah, that's, December 21st is not a
But
coincidence.
that don't mean they're
That's-
gonna have a stimulus.
That's by design.
Because they done it before.
But, for operationally, because fewer and fewer appropriations bills are passed on time. In fact, last year, some of the appropriations bills were enacted into law before October 1st, and it was kind of what should be normal was kind of like, oh, wow, some of these are law. But what that means operationally for the city is, for example, HUD can't put out CDBG allocations until Congress has enacted a final appropriations bill for HUD. So instead of the city knowing in December what the CDBG allocation is going to be, we don't find out until March, April, even May. Same with Homeland Security grants, and on down the line. And for discretionary grant programs, funding notices come out later and later every year. So, and one reaction some federal agencies have had is to compress the application period so that they can still make announcements before the end of the year. So, but unfortunately, that seems to be the kind of new normal for appropriations bills.
It's been going on for 50 years. That's not the new normal.
Right.
There's nothing
Normal,
different than
right.
it is every
Right.
other legislative
Right.
session.
So, gonna hit really quickly on tax extenders. That's, again, what used to be kind of a routine thing. There's a lot of tax provisions that are not permanent, that have a sunset date on them, and generally at the end of every Congress, at the end of every year rather, Congress would take out what's called a tax extenders package. They are looking at a tax extenders package for this year, but that's gotten bogged down in some political issues. But particularly for the city, New Markets tax credit, that expires at the end of 2019. That's a pretty valuable economic development tool, and a good chunk of the city census tracts are eligible for that economic development tool. So that's something we certainly want to see included in an extenders package, and will likely be included in an extenders package if and when one moves. Also, a lot of alternative energy tax provisions expire or are set to expire in the coming years that would be part of a tax extenders package. So I mentioned opportunity zones, which is a good segue from New Markets tax credit. That's the latest. That was part of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. The eligibility criteria for those was the same as New Markets tax credit, but the governor could designate only 25% of the eligible census tracts. And Columbia does have 2 census tracts designated. IRS has been pretty slow to roll out regulations on opportunity zones. We're still waiting for yet another set of those. In the meantime, the clock is still ticking. Opportunity zone designation is good through 2027. So there's already talk in Congress about an extension, possibly another round. But opportunity zones have also come in for a lot of criticism in the media in, I would say, the last 6 months. So there's also,
There's a question on that. What are the criticisms?
sure, the main criticism is that it was a rushed process. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act became law right before Christmas of 2017. Governors had to choose the 25% of eligible census tracts that they would designate by March. That was a quick turnaround. I imagine a lot of governors' offices went from what's an opportunity zone to, oh my God, we have to designate these by March. Some of the criticism has been that there was undue political influence in the choice of some of the designations.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Well, including there's a provision, the eligibility criteria is poverty and unemployment, but the law
What
allows.
the new market tax credit zones overlays already provide all the information. I don't understand what the issue was.
You
make
could also
any
designate a
sense.
census tract that was next to an eligible census tract as
Well,
option.
you know, half of downtown Columbia is the
Right.
new market tax credit, and it's,
Right.
All downtowns in Parma zone.
yeah, all the way in Selder.
Other criticism is that it's, some people fear it's a way to supercharge gentrification. That a lot of the investment is going to places that we're going to get it anyway, and don't necessarily need the federal tax code to help them. Another criticism is that
Speeds it up.
Right, right.
I mean, so that's,
Right. And then another criticism is that there's not much, there's almost no reporting requirements and no requirements. For example, with empowerment zones, you had to show how you were benefiting the census tract in question, how many jobs, et cetera,
Yeah,
et
but there
cetera.
was no follow-up on that either. I mean, there's no.
Right, that was
That's not a
criticism of
good
that program as well,
comparison.
right.
But it doesn't mean not have the regulation. I know another big discussion to that point also is the fact that if you have investors who are not familiar with the community, they come in and just do it for the investment, but there is no benefit to the community. There's no requirement as far as jobs or that the people in the community be able to benefit from the investment. And so I think
And in fairness to Senator Scott, that was always his intention. I mean, it
Absolutely.
was always his intention articulated, I think maybe in meetings that Ralph and I were in together, that there would be significant amounts of community involvement in shaping the zones and, you know, capital is doing what it does, particularly without any guidance from Treasury and IRS, or excuse me, slow guidance. It's like you're building a car, going down the highway at 80 miles an hour, while you're still building or repairing the highway at the same time. And we, you know, we've been, I think pretty fair in the criticism and early criticism, very early criticism, that if in fact investors weren't judicious and thoughtful in how they maximize the credit, that this is exactly what would happen, and now we are where we are, and we met with Secretary Mnuchin and a number of the mayors, and I mean there's more than enough criticism to go around. One of the very first projects in the country is actually here, the movie theater over by Columbia Mall, which is probably more of what people wanted to see. I mean, it's small scale, but meeting the goals and spirit of the Investing and Opportunity Act. But it's it's under fire right now, and it's under fire.
It's under fire, and I think it's important to, and Representative Clyburn in the House and Senator Booker, who was Senator Scott's co-sponsor of the original Opportunity Zone idea, they've introduced legislation to address some of that criticism.
Yeah.
And it's important to take a step back. I mentioned Newmarket's tax credit. That expires at the end of this year, and I think that's an important focus. There's been a lot of focus on opportunity zones, a lot of media, and at the end of the day, I think the best way to look at it is it's another economic development tool in your toolbox, and that's really the best way to look at it. But it's new, it's political, so it is going to come under scrutiny.
it's a first
and
step
criticism.
and you can
Yeah, we've had-
build upon it.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest here. Ryan's been kind of bird dog and all that. And, you know, if you guys open up, everyone has had a copy of the prospectus. Our very first page talks about equitable development. I mean, so equity has got to be kind of pushed and forced into every project. So we'll see.
sorry.
No, and just as a side, I've seen a lot of other cities' prospectuses, and the one Columbia put together is a good one. I think it's a nice document to kind of show what you have to offer. I'll quickly hit another tax issue. One of the things, a big win in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and I think this was in peril, but I think thanks to the work of local governments, the tax exemption for municipal bonds was not taken away in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. The bill that came out of the House would have eliminated the tax exemption for private activity bonds. I think if the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee at the time, Kevin Brady from Texas, had his way, he would have extended it to all municipal bonds. The Senate, we were able to pull out the removal of the tax exemption for private activity bonds in the Senate. Unfortunately, the final bill did eliminate the tax exemption for advanced refundings. So we lost that. I think right now, in an era of really low interest rates, that's not a huge concern, but in the future, it certainly could be, should interest rates. But there is already legislation introduced in the House to reinstate advanced refunding. House Municipal Finance Caucus has formed around the issue of municipal bonds and municipal finance. So the new chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee is the former mayor of Springfield, Massachusetts. So if he had the power to snap his fingers, he would probably bring back advance refunding. But of course, the question is how to pay for it.
And he understands it. And he's smart.
Yeah, he understands it, correct. I think when it comes to municipal bonds on Capitol Hill, regardless of party, the members of Congress who were former mayors and elected officials get it. And a lot of the others, it's a pretty tough education process for them and their staff. But I think anytime you see your House members, I think you should mention how terrible the loss of advance refunding was. Want to talk, perhaps the biggest issue that we will work on over the next year is reauthorization of federal surface transportation programs. The current law, the FAST Act, expires on September 30th, 2020, so that's soon. Congress never gets a highway and transit reauthorization done on time. That's especially true this time, I think, because just to pay for current programs plus inflation, they need $80 billion in new revenue over 5 years, never mind growing the program.
Wow.
So they need a revenue increase to just keep the baseline. That's unlikely in an election year. But nevertheless, they are going to be working over the next year, and what they work on over the next year will be the basis for what does eventually become law. So that's the most important thing we'll work on. I have one other handout. It's this nice, pretty green one, Green for Money. And I use it to illustrate two things. One is one thing we were able to do in the FAST Act is increase the share of surface transportation block grant funds that are suballocated to urbanized areas. So increase the share of funds that come down to Central Midland Council of Governments. So for Columbia, that meant going from just about $10 million in FY 2015 to close to $14 million in FY 2018. And the other thing we were successful in doing is, prior to this current two-year budget agreement, there was another two-year budget agreement covering FY 17 and FY 2018 and FY 2019. And part of that was they agreed to do an extra $20 billion in infrastructure spending, spread out over each year. And so what Congress did was just spread that $10 billion each year out over existing programs. And we worked with the appropriations committees to say, any extra highway money should go through the surface transportation block grant and should be suballocated to urbanized areas. So that meant you see what your base would have been in FY 2018, and then you saw the extra increment you got in FY 2018. Same with FY 2019. The FY 2020 bill in the House and Senate has extra highway funding as well, and some of that would also go through the surface transportation block grant. Looking ahead to reauthorization, and this is a priority for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, to the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties. They convened a meeting with among themselves and with city reps 2 weeks ago to come up with a lobbying strategy and a lobbying focus to grow the amount of money that's localized in the next highway and transit bill. And to tell you why that's so important, I'll try to go through this quickly. But South Carolina metro areas account for 90% of South Carolina's economy. 90%. The Columbia metro area accounts for 18.4% of South Carolina's economy. And you remember, I told you we grew the amount of money suballocated to urbanized areas in the last bill. And that was a big win, and that was a nice win. Even after all of that, so South Carolina metro areas account for 90% of the South Carolina economy. But of the $723 million that in federal highway funds that South Carolina received, excuse me, only 5.8% of those was suballocated to urbanized areas. So 90% of the economy, 5.8. So the Columbia metro area is 18.4% of South Carolina's economy. Your $14 million works out to about 1.6%. Now, that's not to say that some of the other funds, the SCDOT doesn't spend some of those other funds in metro areas. But in terms of funds that your
You're such a nice guy.
MPO has that you have direct influence over.
You have a population on there? How much of the population lives in urbanized areas?
Oh, it's probably not 90% like the economy, but I bet you it's,
It used to be the same, it's kind of 80% and 80%.
Yeah, the nationwide, it's 85.1%, I believe, thereabouts. My guess is we're probably push mid-70s at least, I would think, are pretty close to it, but.
We used to say that 80% of the population and 80% of the wealth were in 15 counties in South Carolina,
right.
out of 46.
Right. So that's just a long way of saying, our biggest priority in the coming year as Congress works on highway and transit reauthorization is growing the amount of that money that is localized. And certainly the bulk of the federal highway program is going to continue to go to state DOTs for the national highway system, but at least upping that share that's localized in the next
We're
bill.
going to spend several billion out here on malfunction.
Yep. So, I'll also add, if you look at the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and the Highway and Transit Subcommittee, it's dominated by members from big metro areas. So I think we're in a good position to grow that local share in the next bill. But I also know that the state DOTs will be on Capitol Hill, making the case for why that shouldn't happen. So your voice on that is going to be important over the next year. Another priority in that bill is maintaining a robust transit program and then growing one of the smaller highway programs, the Transportation Alternatives Program. Again, half of that money is sub-allocated to MPOs, including Central Midlands Council of Governments. And that's money for bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to school, that kind of stuff. Oh, build, no, but I can mention build. The build program is, most of the money, the federal government spends $40-some billion a year on highways, about $12 billion a year on transit, and the bulk of that money goes out by formula. It goes out by formula to state DOTs and MPOs on the highway side, and then by formula to states and transit agencies on the transit side. But there are a few competitive discretionary grant programs, including Build. Build was funded at $900 million last year. I think we're looking at, when they finish the appropriations bills, $1 billion for FY 2020. Last year, and I think again this coming year, Congress is going to tell the administration they have to split that evenly between urban and rural, because the administration in the prior years had tilted it pretty heavily towards rural. But so at the end of the day, I think 500 million of that billion will be for urban areas. It's a very competitive grant program. The average build applicant applies 3 times before they receive a grant.
Okay, well,
So
Chris came back on cue to hear that. She was a big part of our submission this year, but I was just curious if you thought that, it sounds like they think it's a good enough program to keep.
Oh, Congress loves the build program. And the country loves the build program. I mean, Congress appropriates $900 million or $1 billion a year, and they get $25, $30, $35 billion in applications. So, and maybe even more. So it's very, very competitive. But of course, if you don't apply, you have a 0% chance of getting a grant. So.
That's it, you guys, that article, right?
What?
Yeah, I'm trying to look back. Someone got, I'm thinking maybe the Greenville area.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They got,
For the
probably knows.
The Greenway.
Who got it in South
Oh.
Carolina?
Charleston.
It was Charleston, for bikeways.
Yeah, for the Ashley River
Bike,
Bridge.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the bridge and so.
And, in South Carolina, I received 1 build grant, and that's for a state the size of South Carolina, that's kind of normal. And that, I think that was Charleston's 3rd time applying for that project. And it's also, that project is part of the East Coast Greenway, so it had a lot of national support as well.
What's the East Coast Greenway?
The East Coast is a bicycle pedestrian trail from Maine to Florida, parts of which are complete, but most of which is not. I'm going to talk really quickly. I'm taking a lot of time. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk really quickly about local authority and regulation. I should probably say deregulation. But on telecommunications, the FCC, I always come up here and I always complain about the FCC they continue to mount an assault on local authority. They, even while local governments are challenging them in court on their rule issued earlier this year on small cell siting, which essentially preempts local government authority over small cells, they've put out another proposed rule this fall that would broaden the definition of what constitutes a co-location that cities must approve. Just for example, if it's within 30 feet of another installation in the right-of-way, that's a co-location under this proposed
30
rule.
feet?
Yeah, I mean, most spreads, exactly, so you get the idea. If there's an antenna on a building, the entire building is considered a base station, and you can put anywhere else on. So, think of a historic building on Main Street that might have something on the back. You probably don't want that same facility on the front, but under this FCC proposal, that is considered an existing site open to co-location. So, in terms of, I mentioned just there's a lot of, the administration has a pretty aggressive deregulatory agenda. That's certainly true at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with payday lending. I mentioned the Community Reinvestment Act just as an example. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency has put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on updating the Community Reinvestment Act. None of the other banking regulators have done that yet, but that's something we certainly need to keep an eye out. And just in general, we've had a pretty busy time with the regulatory agenda over the last years. And disaster relief, I should say disaster relief reform, that's really not regulatory per se, but there is legislation in the House and the Senate to make some pretty major changes to how disaster relief is implemented and managed, something the city has all too much experience with, unfortunately. And then I'm going to hit really quickly on housing. In one of the handouts, I think the final handout is just a little piece we wrote up about an emerging issue, and attached that is an executive order that the president issued this past summer on eliminating regulatory barriers to affordable housing. And what he means by regulatory barriers to affordable housing are local regulatory barriers to affordable housing. And that's an emerging theme that we're seeing from both sides of the aisle, is that local governments, and particularly zoning and planning, are a barrier to affordable housing. So Secretary Carson has expressed the opinion that CDBG funds should be withheld from local governments that have planning and zoning that is an impediment to affordable housing. Heard the same thing from
What is he considered an impediment?
So, and you hear the same thing from the other side of the aisle. And President Obama kind of made similar comments in his final years in office as well. Single-family zoning. Minimum
Not in my
lot sizes.
backyard.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was
Exactly.
sure.
And nothing's going to happen on this issue in this Congress, but it's something I think you should be aware of.
Yeah.
If you look at all of the Democratic presidential candidates, they have pretty aggressive affordable housing plans, and they get at this issue either through carrots or sticks. So I think our job is to encourage carrots rather than sticks.
Our challenge is our tax code. Doesn't matter what we do, how we structure it. If you can't fix the tax code, then you can't help those people in affordable housing.
You mean the state tax code, you mean? And obviously and from all due respect to the secretary, that's also parroting a lot of the home builders in their language as well.
Absolutely.
Always open to ideas, but we are interested in carrots, not sticks,
Right.
and also some effective partnership with the federal government.
And I know you all have a lot of reading, but I tried to kind of summarize where this issue is. And so I chose Senator Warren's plan just because she's introduced it to legislation, so it was easy to summarize. She uses a lot of carrots. And then I've summarized a bill that's been introduced in the House and the Senate, the Yes in My Backyard Act, which would...
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's called the Yes in My Backyard Act, and it would require local governments to do an assessment of whether they have impediments to affordable housing through their zoning code. And if they don't do that, they would withhold CDBG funds. So others have gone so far as to say withhold CDBG and transportation funds. So I just want to, I don't want to be alarmist, but I just want to raise awareness of this issue and have tried to do that in this handout.
I think it would be very helpful if all the candidates on all sides of the aisles actually spent some time in the local government world and understood what the challenges are,
Right.
instead of
Right.
just spouting off at the mouth at a podium, not understanding the trickle-down effect of these
You know, it's
plans that they're throwing out left and right.
it's all relative, because even when we start to make substantial progress with affordable housing, you still have a challenge of livable wages. I'm dealing with a lot, I've got 3 calls about that, but folks just can't afford to live where they live regardless of where it is now. And
It's a very insightful comment, Sam. I agree. I mean, we've been talking about rising costs of housing, I mean, everywhere, all across the country. But we're also not seeing wages rise. So we spend a lot of time talking about the cost of housing, but not the fact that wages haven't even come close to keeping up with the economic growth of the country.
In our situation, you had a different tax structure, then there would be a much clearer balance.
Oh, you're right. No, when the legislature enacted 388, they cut out one of the 3 legs of the taxing stool of the state, and threw a whole lot of things out of whack. And with our DNA as a city and county, threw it completely out of whack. So.
But the taxing structure is just one issue. I mean, I think there are lots of other impediments, including, as Ralph talked about, having carrots to incentivize it. I mean, I know developers who, taxing structure might be an issue, but there are some that taxing structure is not going to be the determining factor of whether or not they do development. The other things are going to be availability of where to put it and the support that they can get from.
Well, that's the
Yeah,
NIMBY
community.
problem we have. We got a lot of people who stand up there and support affordable housing until it moves into their neighborhood.
well, I read this article over the weekend where this nonprofit over on Johns Island wants to build affordable housing kind of like across the street from the Angel Tree. And those people the article is implying that some folks have an issue with that.
Historic overlays and things like that affect it all
Right.
too. I mean, you go look at some of our neighborhoods with the Character Protection Act have eliminated some opportunities to put in housing, multiple units and this and that,
Right.
that affect it. And I think that's what they're talking about when they talk about the local zoning.
But also, if you know the history
It's a real
of that area, I would think that they would be welcoming the people who traditionally would be living in the affordable housing project that they're going to put there. You know anything about the history of the Low Country?
Safety.
So Ralph, I know you have to move on. I'm just looking at your summary of the policies that are considered impediments. If I'm reading this correctly, like legalizing short-term home rentals. So that's what, Airbnb?
Right. So, and that's one of the things, Yes in My Backyard Act would so, and there's 2, I mean, certainly that's, I would view that as federal preemption. People advocating for this approach would argue that it's federal preemption that's needed because local governments aren't going to act. I would throw out, because a lot of the advocates of Minneapolis has gotten a lot of attention in the past few months because Minneapolis eliminated single-family zoning. And that's what that both sides, I mean, from the left and the right, are kind of getting at, what local government should do. But of course,
Tamika, that falls into what I think Missy's been working on, of looking at some projects that, we path the way easy to provide water and sewer to single family, but not multifamily.
and it's probably the toughest issue you all deal with on a day-to-day
about
basis.
that.
Yeah, so I don't want to be alarmist, but I just wanted you to be aware that this is an
It's
emerging
good
issue.
information. Thank you, Ralph.
And it's something we may have to work on in future years and address. EECBG, I shortened that. It's the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. It takes up a lot of space, so I shortened it to EECBG. That's a program, and I'll brag a little bit about Deborah. Deborah came to work for us from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the first iteration of the ECBG was authorized in the Energy Policy Act of 2007, that's signed by President Bush, and it was funded once in FY 2009 under the Recovery Act, and it's modeled on CDBG. It's direct funding to states, cities, and counties, for a broad array of energy efficiency and conservation purposes. And when I say broad array, I think there's 20 eligible uses listed in the legislation, and then including any other activity the secretary deems eligible. So very flexible. The city used its one-time allocation in FY 2009 to do some retrofits on some city buildings, to do a broad plan. It's a program we'd like to see come back. Mayor Benjamin testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee in February.
Earlier this year?
Earlier this year. And actually, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has passed legislation to reauthorize the ECBG. I think that's probably going to head to the House floor. It's a long way to that becoming law and getting reauthorization, but I think that's another priority is reauthorizing that program and getting it funded again. Disaster assistance, I don't have much to say about disaster assistance. We've been working on it a lot. Your delegation secured another allocation of, this time, CDBG mitigation funds. And staff, the plan on that is due to HUD in March. So that's something that continues to happen. Then the 2020 census, now it is ramping up. The Census Bureau is hiring. The continuing resolution that's keeping the government open until December 21st funds most federal agencies at last year's level, the pro rata share of last year's level. The Census Bureau got an exception because clearly they can't be spending the same amount of money this time this year that they were last year. They're hiring people, they're opening field offices. The census faces some problems. I think you're all aware of those. And I think at the end of the day, you all have a pretty strong bully pulpit and you have some infrastructure. And the more you do.
We have more infrastructure here than they have at the state. And I mean, our complete count committee has been, well, we've funded it to some degree, but they've been providing some great leadership to the state. And of course, Dr. Dillingham was here last week meeting with some state folks. But yeah.
Yeah, you don't need me to tell you that, but the more you can do between now and April,
Sure.
the better. You have almost zero control over how well the Census Bureau does. The one thing you do have control over is your local complete count efforts.
Just one question. The Fair Chance Act, what's the likelihood of that passing?
Remind me what the Fair Chance
That was, it's Congressman Cummings proposed it. I think he added on to something, but it's basically, it would be the next step from the First Step Act that would allow formerly incarcerated people.
Federal reintegration?
Yeah.
You know, not a lot is going to become law in this Congress, apart from spending bills and things that are a must do. But I think there is bipartisan support for improving ex-offender services and bolstering that. So I think that could have a chance. It's still a long shot, but I think there's bipartisan support for that.
And just, I mean, I know Congressman Clyburn knows, but, we did pass our ban the box here. So I know just making sure that as those conversations come, people know that we're interested in that as well.
Sure.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy.
So Chris came back by. Chris, you had stepped out, and I just want to acknowledge you.
I want to announce
for
we
your
actually just won a grant to hire a grant writer from USC. It's amazing how these things happen in cycles,
Right on time, too, Mayor.
Chris, awesome. We're gonna miss you. Something awful. Something awful. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're gonna miss you. I was just telling her a few minutes ago that, I think it was about 3 or 4 days ago, I was recommending a couple of folks to go talk with her about how you feed yourself, and also that grant writers sometimes, they come in on a salary, and some of them come in because they eat what they kill. To use a more harsh term, but you know, so valuable to organizations. And I even took the liberty of asking her, was she moonlighting? She says, no, she won't moonlight. But I've noticed your work, and again, what you've been killing on our behalf as a city, and I think we're doing pretty good, and we're better off because you were here.
You see all of our employees to eat what they kill? Is that what you're implying?
I'm not going there.
We'll walk around Main Street with crossbows and everything. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
So we will also have our state legislative update, and as Michelle is coming to the podium, I want to recognize Caroline Bocash, who.
She had to step out.
Okay, so she keeps Kyle straight most days, I know, at his office, and Juana, I should have recognized at the beginning of all of this, because she helps keep all of us straight with our legislative priority setting with state and federal, and just coordinating things, and just signed up for a new tracking device that's called, I can't remember, just so council will, it's gonna look a little different to you this year, but it's still a good device that, many over in the lobby are using as well, yeah.
Is that Mary Green's thing?
Yeah.
Mary Green?
Tracking sound or cameras?
No,
Difference
no,
is
the
he's
track,
billing
that-
his
no,
clients
the
and we're
track,
having to
like
pay
that
for it.
information we see on the legislative bills.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
About to go somewhere. I don't need to go there. Keep my mouth shut.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity as always. Juana is very helpful, and all city staff really is very helpful. We meet through the year with everyone who's in this room, who's staff, to help guide what we do and represent the city well at the State House. So, last year we had to hurry through this. I see now that I've got 3 hours, so I'm really looking forward to
No, sir.
just digging into this a little bit.
It'll be your last time. It'll be your last time reporting to us. Your very last.
Did we renew his contract yet?
We do that alternating times of the year from this meeting, so. Let's, let me do this. This was without a doubt the most, the busiest year since I have been representing the city at the State House. And there, not only in the number of issues that we touched on, but also, and dealt with, I shouldn't say touched on, dealt with, but then in also of the number of issues that were resolved with legislation being passed and signed into law. So I'm going to go through this quickly for me, which will probably be normal pace for other people. And I will then just take your questions and thoughts at the end of it. And then we always like to get a signal from council if we can at the end on the priorities for this coming year. So I've got it. Okay. So this is all on the PowerPoint. We have copies, I think, if somebody wants them. But okay, so these are the priorities that we started out with from a year ago. And they cover all of the things that we were working on and things that we saw coming in the year. Now, we start out now, let's talk about the budget. The local government fund, and we'll hit this in enacted legislation after we get finished with these budget items, because the local government fund, which we work on every year, finally got quote-unquote resolved this year with legislation that changes how it's done each year. At the end of the day, $10 million was added to it this year, and the city receives $3.064, $713 million from the local government fund is what we received this year. We also worked with Representative Rutherford to secure $500,000 in appropriated funds to extend the Vista Trail from the current terminus in Elmwood Park northward toward Earlwood. I'm not exactly sure how far 500,000 gets us, but it takes us the next leg. We also were awarded $400,000 with the help of Senator Harpootlian for railroad crossing safety projects in the city.
You remember roughly, Missy, what our cost per mile was with Greenway? You remember? And we own much of that land, right? Okay. And it's kind of a rule of thumb. I forget how much it is.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, we definitely need to keep that, because he's committed to help us get, to North Main. So we need to stay on him to, to get more, so that we can at least get through that portion.
Make sure they both know we're very appreciative.
$100 million worth of surplus. State government eats up a tremendous amount of our infrastructure, and we got $900,000. We got 400 Harpoolian. I was there for the deal. I mean, he got us that, and hopefully he can get us some more, but we really need to figure out a way that we can get some more towards our infrastructure and stuff, because the center of state government's here, and we really ought to get a little bit more share, even if it's through the local government fund or other projects. Because it seems like all the projects are going south or north.
What do you, well, talk about it later.
The local government fund is split based on municipal population.
Yeah, I think there ought to be a nice little, if you're centered,
Bonus.
yeah, for the host city. Everybody else gets a fee, we should get something, but no, I do think we ought to come up with a plan for this year of some projects that we could go to the state legislature, because I do think that they should fund some more local, especially our road system here.
I was about to say, all you gotta do is hit I-20 or 20 in the afternoons, early mornings. You can see the usage out there, but also usage from the interior of the city, where folks are coming and going to get where they want to go.
The
I
pothole
agree.
patrol needs to hit.
Right. Well, it's resurfacing as well. I don't think you can pothole but so much.
Absolutely. Let's get back on.
We go back, okay. Budget, enacted laws. This is the local government fund. We had not been hitting the quote-unquote amount that was in the law for 10 years plus. So this year, this law passed, and it says that the local government fund will be at this level, at $233 million, I think was set this year. And it will go up or down by up to 5% or down to 5%, depending on the projected state budget. And I think the date is up there when it's projected, February 15th. So this year, it will go up by 5%, because we're going to increase the state budget by more than 5%, recurring funds.
And this cannot be circumvented by a proviso that steals it?
I'll go back to an adage that Ralph knows, which is no Congress can bind the next Congress. So, but this is what is the new agreement is in the new law, and hopefully we will stick to this so that we're not having this argument every year over whether you are quote unquote fully funding the local government fund, because the local government fund has now been reset with a much better increase/decrease mechanism than was there before, which Councilman Duval can probably recite from his memory.
Only thing they did is reset so they're back to a zero, and yes, they can screw it up 10 years from now.
Back to go, plus $10 million from last year, and off to the races for the future. But that was an enacted law. Another enacted law. Well, this was part of the budget, I'm sorry. This is the pension plan reimbursement that, yet again, they put another 1% in. We talk to them about this every year, because we're increasing by 1% each year until, I think, 2022 or 2023. And if they don't continue to add the 1% each year, we will go up by 2%. This is already, as Jeff and Missy can tell you, a cost that we have to absorb every year. That cost would more than double if they didn't put this amount of money in every year. This is the end of the budget. Let's see if we got that right. Yep. Relocation of utility lines. This is a huge win that we've been working on for years with the help of Clint Sheely and Dana Higgins and others, Joey Jaco, to get the DOT to pay for the relocation of utility lines on on DOT projects so that we didn't have to pay that cost. So this legislation, the only way that we got DOT to finally agree to it, and we all worked together in the end, but there's no way we were going to pass this legislation without everybody agreeing to it. The DOT wanted a sunset on it just in case it wasn't working as they thought that it would. So it has a sunset of July 1st, 2026. I think the Carolina Crossroads project is estimated to be $1 billion or more.
More than that, yeah, I think it was 1.2 or more.
So up to 4% of that
Hey, Council.
would be available to pay, in state funds, would be available to pay for the relocation of our water utility, water sewer utility on that project. So this is a big win for Columbia Water to get this passed. A lot of people worked on this. The Ride Sharing Safety Act, I know after the tragedy in Five Points, this was passed with support from the city and others after the Samantha Josephson tragedy. This is something we talked about for the last couple of years, which was supporting the an increase in the community development tax credits, and we did support that and worked with that organization, the SCASED, to get the increase from $1 million to $3 million, and from a 33% tax credit to a 50% tax credit for donations to certified community development organizations in the state. I put the changes to the Textile Communities Revitalization Act in there just to note that there was a change this year. That change did not affect anything in the city of Columbia, but it has in prior years, just to let council know that they continue to tweak that law. And I think it's because there's a limited number of textile facilities in the state, and if they need to tweak it to accommodate a new project that is meritorious, they will, which they did for us in the prior year for our Bull Street development. I'm sorry, that was an abandoned buildings thing that we tweaked the year before, not textiles. Okay, we're not going to go through this in detail. Happy to answer any questions on it. This bill is the culmination, this is the second bill that's culminated from years of work on animal shelter rules. They did, in the end, they did not include tethering, and they didn't include animal shelter standards language, but the Columbia Animal Shelter, led by Marley Drum, and other animal shelters around the state have been in a long discussion / battle / negotiation with private providers to reach this bill, and this is the year that the bill was passed by the House and the Senate, signed by the governor, and this bill this issue is taken care of for a while. Another small bill that our firm and city staff may have worked on this, but we didn't have a lot of impact on it, I would say. We have a lot of impact on some things, but just, you should know, because this bill passed, it sort of tightens up the oversight of the local government 911 operations. Okay, so that's everything that passed. Those were all the bills that passed into law. Busy year. Some years we have one or two. This year we had a lot more. These are bills that did not pass into law, but that are legislation that is pending. This is the one that would have the biggest negative impact on the city, probably, which is the business license. There's business license tax legislation that has been put forward by the State Chamber of Commerce and a number of other groups that would drastically change the way the business license tax works. Probably the thing that stands out to me the most about this bill is that if your business is not located in the city of Columbia, then you would get a business license just as a foreign business permitted to be in the city, and your license would be $100, which means I could move over to cross the bridge into West Columbia and then just come back to the city of Columbia and just say, I'm a foreign business, I just pay $100. And it would be easy for any business to do that. It's-
State Chamber, who doesn't pay a business license, is the one pushing the legislation.
State Chamber is pushing the legislation, yes.
The people who don't pay are the people pushing.
They have very nice offices in the 1401 Gervais building.
Bankers Trust.
At the-
So there's no
But-
time period for someone to have not, for them to have been an established business somewhere else?
No, no, but law doesn't provide for that. It just says that if you're an out of jurisdiction business, you would pay a maximum of $100. But there are a number of other, there are a lot of distasteful things about this bill that we could come back to. That we could go through if you want to, or we can come back to it later.
We need to start addressing that issue because the municipal association has got their portal up and operational now, and more businesses are using the portal. And by having the cities standardize and use the model ordinance, which we don't in the city of Columbia use, if we can by voluntarily getting the cities to adopt the model ordinance, we can preempt this state attempt to take away our business license authority.
Very well said. I don't need to repeat that.
We need to put that on the agenda.
I think it's coming, isn't it? But still a bad policy, nonsensical, and
This is a bill that's mainly driven by people that just don't like the business license tax. So they want to, they're,
fee.
the fee. We've moved from calling it a fee to, I think we're calling it a tax now, but we can call it a fee.
We as a French word, we call it the fee.
So but the people who are in favor of this are against the whole
My
fee
grandmother, I
itself.
apologize.
Tort reform, that won't pass anytime soon in the State House.
It's a next issue. This issue is the one that came from the tragedy at Henley Homes.
Allen Bennett Court.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Where did Henley Homes come from? Allen Benedict Court. We worked extensively on this bill, including rewriting the bill and actually drafting the bill for Senator Jackson to better accomplish what he intended to do and to make the original bill consonant with what the city does, which is the city appoints board members. The original bill had it that the city would take over and manage the housing authority in the case of an emergency or a crisis. And there was not much appetite at the city of Columbia for a variety of reasons for us to be engaged in running a housing authority. So we modified this bill. We worked with Senator Jackson. He got it passed in the Senate, and the bill is now in the House. I don't know what the appetite for passing the bill in the House is this coming session or not. We'll see. Senator Jackson was very resolute that he wanted to pass a bill that would provide better processes if this were to happen again in the future. Tort Claims Act. This was a strong charge by a number of senators coming into this last legislative year. They had one bill that would take they had a bill that would make the caps unlimited for torts. Today it's a $300 per incident, and I'm sorry, $300 and $500.
300,000.
I'm sorry, 300,000. Thank you. I'm sitting here looking at it and I can't
If
say
it
it.
was 3 or 500, we wouldn't be talking about it.
We'd be going up more than double. There was a lot of discussion in committee on what to do and how to do and whether to do. And in the end, the bill that only raises the limits from 300 and 500 to 601 million, so they doubled the limits, that's the only bill that passed out of the Senate. And that's over in the House now. The bill that would have changed all of the other components of how those cases are litigated is still in committee, and I don't think it will pass because there's not enough agreement to get it out of committee. We worked to the original committee proposals were, I think, to increase it from 300, 500 to 2 million, 1.5 million. So we worked with other municipalities and other counties and other stakeholders to get it down to just a simple doubling from 3 to 6 and 500 to 1 million. I think it's the first time that the caps have been raised since the 90s.
And the rider that says the tort attorneys who voted for it can't use, they can't try those cases.
I think-
Those judges.
You're being too ambitious.
I think that fell off right there toward the end.
I figured it got lost. Talk about inside baseball. Wow.
This is,
The bipartisan play, at least.
It is.
this is a bill that we're hopeful could help with repairs that we'll need to make associated with the canal, and I know that the negotiations with FEMA are ongoing. This bill's out of the Senate, and it's over into the House, and it would allow, it was, as you may be able to imagine, it was initiated by coastal interests, but it would allow using hospitality tax revenue, some hospitality tax revenue for mitigation of flooding and the effects of flooding. And the language in it right now has a very artfully drafted comma in it that allows us to use it for repair of flood-damaged facilities. We are going to try to make that a little bit more obvious, make it a little more explicit in the language in the House Ways and Means. Yep, okay. Another bill that we've been working on and has really been some of mainly last year, most of the energy was used to get the local government fund bill passed on the municipalities front. The Municipal Tax Relief Act is a bill that has been filed for a couple of years that would allow local governments, not counties, but cities, municipalities, to put a 1 cent sales tax onto the sales tax, and a minimum of 20% would have to go to rollback of taxes. We've talked about this in the past. It could be up to 100%, and it could be whatever council wants it to be. I have been told that the city of Spartanburg intends, if this passes, they would like to add a penny and make every bit of the money apply to 6% property to roll back business property taxes. All of it, not spend any of it for anything else.
Is that constitutional? You gotta treat all classes equally. How can you say you put it all on 6%?
Because it's a single class. I don't think it has to, you can pick as long as you do the entire class, which would help with affordable housing. Problem is you're taking it from one pocket and adding it to another, and in Columbia, where you got 52% of rentals, you're really hurting the individual. It just doesn't help.
It would give the city the option, yeah. The city would have the option to use this for, the original impetus for the bill has come out of Horry County, where the city of Myrtle Beach wants the ability to
Tax all the
tourism,
tourists.
right, put a 1% sales tax to be able to take care of some of their capital projects. The bargain that was struck was to make a minimum of 20% of it apply to property tax rollback. So, following this, the annexation bill by Mandy Powers Norrell, despite a lot of work, continues to be strongly opposed by the county association. Can't get them to budge on that.
Got a new director coming in on the 1st of January. Try again.
Right, yeah, try again.
Tim Winslow's gonna be great.
Community charge, which is the bill that Rutherford's got, that the city would allow the city to put a community charge on nonprofits with more than $1 billion. The opposite of that was the bill that was filed by Senator Campbell that would have allowed a property tax exemption for privately owned properties as long as they are carrying out the functions of a public university or a public body. So we quickly jumped into action on that with some letters in opposition and meetings with senators, and so far, I don't think that's going to see a committee hearing. That would exacerbate the problem that we have in the city of Columbia.
Garbage.
So this over at the University of South Carolina, they want to have some of their private sector partners own and develop property that would be used, leased by the university, but it would be owned by the private sector partners, and they want that private sector partner to not have to pay, not leased by the university. It would be utilized by the university.
Yeah, we've
Excuse me,
been
not leased.
on record, we sent a letter vehemently opposed.
Vehemently opposed to that.
Vehemently opposed. Yeah.
And Senator Harpootlian has been very helpful in that. And I think I don't think that this, we'll stay on top of it, but as of now, we've been told by Senate Finance that there's no plan to move the bill. This is a bill that has been, this was the third year we've dealt with this bill, I believe. And it has to do with, it came out of the Emmanuel Church tragedy, and it has to do with faster reporting of crimes to SLED by municipal courts and others. It's not gotten out of the Senate yet because it continues to get tied to some gun control provisions in the bill that slow the bill down. So Senator Kempson doesn't want the rest of the bill without the gun control, and too many on the other side of the aisle from Senator Kempson don't want any gun control in the bill. So the bill has been kind of stuck. In the meantime, our municipal court system may have to comply with these if this bill if they ever find a contract and move the bill forward. What we've tried to do is to try to make these provisions in the bill something that our municipal court system could comply with if, in fact, the bill passes. We're not advocating for or against the bill. Mental health patient transport. I note, I didn't realize this before I started talking, but I note now that so many of these bills come out of tragedies. This came out of tragedy in Marion County where 2 people were drowned in a mental health transport van during the flood. And this bill came out of the Senate. It went through 3 different iterations in the Senate. It, in essence, came out of the Senate just requiring law enforcement officers to have more training, to have training if they are going to be driving a mental health patient transport van, which local law enforcement agencies, county and municipals, are required to do by the state when requested, which is often. Richland County does a lot more than the City of Columbia does, but the City of Columbia does a lot of it. The bill is out of the Senate. It's in the House. We will continue to work on it to try to make it have the least amount of negative impact on our police department as possible. Child care facilities. You guys may remember this bill has been around for a long time, and this year it did not move. And the issue with this bill is that it's an attempt to try to bring more child care facilities under DHEC regulations for child care facilities to try to stem the problem of people who thwart the law and are not regulated, and they're taking care of children perhaps in their home. I'm sorry? Residential and other places. Well, the way that the bill's been written, it captures our summer our summer programs that we operate at City of Columbia Parks. So we have been working hand in hand with Jim Headley at the Association for Government Parks, or municipal and county parks around the state. And we've actually, Jim and I have been talking about this in off-season, just about got some language struck that would allow the regulation of our programs to mirror the regulations that we already do. And we were really concerned about some of the background check requirements that they had and some of the other requirements that they had that would make sense for somebody who was operating an ongoing business or an ongoing concern, but it doesn't make sense for somebody who's operating a series of summer camps for an 11-week period in the summertime. So this bill, it continues to have problems passing for reasons other than our concerns, but we're trying to just make sure that our concerns get addressed in case it passes.
So Kyle, let me ask you
Yes.
this. Does it mean then that someone who perhaps is doing something residentially could become quote-unquote certified?
It means they would have to become subject to DHEC oversight.
which they are now residentially.
They have, well, supposed to.
Where they, okay, so that puts some, actually, that puts some teeth into residential persons who are taking care of children residentially.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on that side of the bill.
Yeah.
What I know is that a number of senators are, and House members, are concerned because either they run childcare facilities that are commercial childcare facilities, and they say it's not right that we have to be subject to all these things, and there's these other kids that are going into, someone's house where they're only taking care of 4 or 5 kids in their living room every day for cash payment, and those kids need the same protection from anything that could happen to them as the kids that are down here at this commercial facility that has 100 kids every day. So they're trying to make the law, it's a child protection thing. We don't want to wait until we have some tragedy in some home childcare concern before we make sure that these people are doing what they're supposed to do. You don't want to have the wrong people taking care of children in unsafe circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. It's just that the way that the bill is written, it was going to affect what we do with our summer camp programs. That's where we had to jump in.
So what it's gonna take then is some more fleshing out of the concerns related to residential childcare.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
It's going to take some more fleshing out. You got a combination of concerns by the, you know what, I really need to get back to you on that because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing as to what's holding the bill back. I just want to make sure, we're not trying to pass the bill or stop the bill. We just want to make sure that it doesn't inadvertently gore our ox.
Sure.
So, but I'll figure that out and see where it is. Small Wireless Facilities Development Act. This goes back to something that Ralph was talking about, which is FCC passing rules that allow these new antennas to be attached to public facilities. And the bill that was written for that and introduced by the AT&T and the others that were promoting this bill in South Carolina essentially gave them the ability to put any of these new 5G antennas. I don't know if you've seen them around town. Sometimes you see them lying on the ground before they install them. Sometimes you see them install them on the poles. They're about this big, about yay big and about this big around. And it would have given them the ability to put it anywhere they wanted to. And so we were successful in stopping that version of that bill. And I think I testified on behalf of the City of Columbia on that. And it drove everyone into a negotiating table. And we came out with a bill that gives a balance between their need to install new equipment and the city's need to be able to protect certain properties and certain rights of way from not having those those facilities attached to them. They call them small wireless facilities. So we have a good compromise bill. It's got some opposition from some other cities, not from us, and I expect this to pass this next year. Top priority.
Two-year session?
Second year, yeah, this is a second year, right, so we're carrying over everything.
So no fees, no fees on the infrastructure? The bill provides no tax or fee assess.
Oh, that is on, that they can't charge the end user. You can't get a fee for it on your cell phone bill.
Okay.
They can't, they're not able to go hit the consumer up for that money,
What
which
about
I would
fee-
think they would have to go through the PSC anyway.
So what about the ability for municipalities and others to, well, that's exactly what it's about. It's not about, I mean, deployment, the technology is the same just about everywhere. Of course, the greatest focus is in dense areas. The question has always been about, whether or not the local governments have the ability to monetize right of way and the other aesthetics and security and safety issues alike. And this, of course, this is like legislation we're seeing in much more hardly fought and litigious states like Ohio and Texas and the like. But in any event, I'm just curious what fee, if any. Of course, the FCC is actively engaged in that space too, trying to limit. Just curious as to what that looks like.
I'll dig into that.
Okay. And again, this is not focused on us. I think we've probably been the easiest to work with city in the entire state.
We've been accommodating, right.
Very much so.
We joined the Just Say No crowd because what they had was ridiculous. And then they came, I think, Mayor, they may have met with you and others on this. They were certainly blowing up my cell phone to try to get us.
Actively involved in discussions with the industry, but
Yes.
it doesn't make sense to have some sweeping legislation that adversely affects cities and others.
And I think I think that it was a very good process that we went through to get to something that was a compromise on both sides. Hasn't passed yet, but
Absolutely.
we'll be making sure that it doesn't have some sweeteners added to it, the wrong kind of sweeteners. Power of the county sheriff, which was a bill that was Senator Harpootlian pushed on behalf of being able to get the Richland County Sheriff to go into 5 points to enforce alcohol laws, largely non-controversial. That bill, I believe, is out of the Senate, but is not, nothing has happened on it in the House. The vaping bill, which I know Councilman Duval is very familiar with, is a bill that we could spend some time discussing if we needed to. I don't know how much that bill is going to go forward now with all the controversy around the country on the health care aspects of vaping.
West Columbia is now adopting our ordinance.
Casey, wasn't it?
And this bill, they added a provision to this bill that would specifically allow our ordinance to stand. It was other aspects of the bill that are still controversial.
I don't understand why that's even a thing. We've had a smoking ordinance, and all we did was add another smoking device. I mean, I don't understand where somebody says it allows us to stand. It's an ordinance that's been enacted and enforced and currently active. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, we had to get them to put that explicitly in the bill, that it would not hurt an ordinance like that, which they did. The battle is, again, back down to Horry County and Myrtle Beach, where they want to, they're trying to pass legislation that says that they can't regulate where vape shops are, because they don't want to have,
Or flavors.
they don't want Myrtle Beach to turn into Vape Beach. So, and with all the stores and things that are around there. Cannot deny a license because of a prior criminal conviction is a bill that we had some discussions on. Some people here had discussed that as part of criminal justice reform. That bill has not moved. It hadn't gotten out of the Senate yet, but it got out of subcommittee or committee. Okay, this is the one typo out of the 1,000 words in this thing. This should say 2020 state legislative
Dustin.
Smart board. So this is what we propose that council adopt.
We support
I knew he was gonna say that.
a tort. I mean,
Oh,
who
I'm
says
sorry.
we
I thought you
support
were-
that as a city?
Where's that? Oh.
Let's get to it. Let's
Yeah.
let them go through all of them first.
I thought you were talking about the first bullet.
Continue
That's what I
working.
thought he was gonna say too.
Continue working with the governor and legislators on state funding for city projects, including the convention center expansion, which is something that we've talked about, trying to get state money to assist with the convention center expansion after money was provided this last year to Greenville. And also funding, if possible, for moving USC's medical school to Bull Street. Opposed business tax license legislation in its current form. Support allowing governments to use hospitality and accommodations tax for flooding mitigation at tourism-related areas. There's the tort claims legislation. The reason that that's put up there was, I guess what I meant to say was, and you guys can change this if you
We
want to.
don't support it.
It's
I don't
yours.
think we support it. I mean, did I miss something?
Just,
Did I miss discussion on supporting
Me
the?
too.
what I meant to say was support keeping it only to that level. But we can
support that.
we can oppose.
I don't want to support
I think we-
increase.
I think we
That's
oppose it.
crazy.
Okay.
I mean,
We're
I mean,
trying
that
to
obviously is discussion.
recruit businesses, not run them away.
So we take that one off. Continuance of the pension plan reimbursement in
Where
the
is it
state
here? Are
budget.
we missing something? I mean, we gotta keep the tort claims limit of cost of living or
Yeah, 'cause
something?
that's-
What?
Right, because that would affect us.
Right, and I'll be honest, I mean, I put that on there because we were staring down the gun at
I know,
at
much
2
higher,
million
much
and 1
higher.
million, you know,
Yeah,
at one
I
point.
understand that. I
So
understand
we
that.
were like, okay, this is, but we take it off of there.
God bless. We got a lot of trial lawyer friends and supporters and family members. But we don't agree with that.
Pension plan reimbursement. Community charge legislation for nonprofits with over $1 billion in revenue. Passage of housing authority legislation.
so
in-
now-
Why is the
Tom.
threshold so high?
That's
Is that
what,
Todd's bill?
that's Todd's bill. I don't know why there's $1 billion in
That
there.
doesn't help us one bit. Not one bit. It provides nothing for the city of Columbia.
Was the university in the hospital?
Gross
Hospital?
receipts of $1 billion.
But is that the one also with the CDFIs?
No, no, that's just the one for
That's for the hospitals and the universities.
hospitals and
Higher
universities.
education.
Right.
Plan reimbursement
We never, we
budget.
never did discuss.
And I'm sorry, I know you're going through the list, and we're on time constraints. So the pension plan reimbursement in the state budget,
Community charge legislation for nonprofits over $1 billion, that's the bill. So it's basically saying support that bill. Housing authority legislation in its current form. Allow cities to annex certain enclaves by ordinance. We'll keep trying on that. Support legislation that allow municipalities to recover funds
Is that-
spent to demolish and
the
mitigate blighted property.
annexation ordinance is a current bill? I mean, is a current piece of legislation, or are we asking for
Yes.
that?
No, the annexation is a current piece of legislation. Mandy Powers
And
Morel
Andy's bill.
legislation.
Andy, okay.
Um,
Can we make sure we discuss that with the county as well?
Yes.
Funds spent, demolish and mitigate blighted property.
Demolish or mitigate blighted property, recovering those funds. That bill has not yet been introduced this year. We've been trying to get that bill for years and years. And Municipal Tax Relief Act. And then oppose that legislation that would exempt more property from local property taxes.
Have we talked to Chief Holbrook about the Sheriff Powers and about that provision, that bill?
I don't think we've had a discussion about that bill. We might have. It was back early in the session. I'll be happy to, yeah,
Let's make sure we do that.
okay.
Childcare facilities, municipal court reporting, plastic pipe, mental health, transport.
See where we are.
And the last one.
County Sheriff Powers, workforce criminal justice reform legislation, which was the one that the city has been active on workforce criminal justice legislation, the ban the box, and there was one other thing I believe that the city has done. And we were asked to try to help on those similar things at the legislature.
You may have already mentioned it, Kyle, on the pension plan reimbursement and state budget. Remind me, what is that?
That's,
Dig it into 1%.
they're,
They want us to support, continue to do that.
Can you do that? Okay.
we go with a group of people to Ways and Means, and we say, we need this to continue this next year. I don't think we're gonna have a problem in this year. I don't think it's gonna be a big ask this year, but they need to hear from everyone.
What's the windfall this year? How much money? Billion?
It's $1 billion in.
Somebody's
it's
getting somebody's getting overtaxed.
Yeah, it's $1 billion.
A lot of people.
Well, and a growing state too. You know, I mean, the state's growing.
The state could be on fire. $1 billion is yeah. Anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry. You did it all?
don't know why that says support vaping, because we were
Man.
against that bill. We're trying to
Yeah.
keep it from moving. So, the county sheriff powers, I can talk to Chief Holbrook about workforce criminal justice reform legislation. MASC advocacy initiatives that benefit the city of Columbia. When we had to put this together and submit it, they had not put any out yet, and we're told right now that with the hiring of their new executive director, they may not have any priorities for this year, public priorities. And then monitoring these other bills for negative effects or possible positive impacts on the city. So I think what I see up here is, in terms of sort of marching orders for what we're doing, is to take out the tort claims and to,
I think we ought to have a discussion about it, about what we really want from the legislature this year as a group. I mean, these are pretty broad, and we ought to be on top of, but I think there's probably some real specific things that we'd like to see, and I think it'd probably be worth us working together to provide something for our representatives up there.
A short list of wants.
Yeah, because I was saying, the other thing is, this is kind of reactionary to things that are already pending,
Right.
versus there might be some things like addressing our taxing structure, or some other things that we may need to get an advocate,
Specifically.
yeah, actually something proposed, an advocate to push.
I agree with that.
Kyle, when you went over the review of the proposed bills, I know there's a lot, but what's the status of, I guess, something that would preempt local government's ability to do plastic bag bans? I read something about that.
the plastic bag ban, the ban on bans, as it's called, is a response from the plastic bag industry to the fact that municipalities beginning along the coast are banning single-use plastic bags. And the legislation was pushed this last year. It did not get out of the Senate this last year. And so then I can't remember which senator, but put it up as a budget proviso. That would be a one-year ban on bans. So he's going to accomplish it in the budget, and it was roundly defeated in the Senate. Something like, I don't know, 35 to 12 or something. And so that just really ended the discussion on that this year. So subsequent to that, well, I don't know if any municipality, I can't remember off the top of my head if anybody subsequent to that has banned plastic bags, but I know that Arcadia Lakes here in our area has. Not a lot of retail establishments in Arcadia Lakes, but nevertheless, they have. Folly Beach has,
Well,
Isle of Palms has.
Richland County is considering one. I know our committee, Environment and Infrastructure Committee, we talked about it. We've not put it on there, but I just think that's something we need to monitor, because there is some discussion among our council and Richland County Council whether or not we would do a similar ban, so. I'd like that to be looked at, and then, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's just recent, Marvin Pendarvis, proposed a bill about redeveloping malls. Can we monitor that?
Redeveloping
Malls.
malls.
Abandoned malls. I think he pre-filed that last week.
To do what
There's
with
some
it?
really good case studies
Marvin
out
just-
of what people have done.
I think we've already sent the letter on the hate crime legislation as far as endorsing any state level legislation that.
Marvin's just a policy wonk too. He's putting out a lot of good stuff.
You all have already.
Really a lot of good stuff.
He is, and I.
Really proud of him.
I can't recall, there's also one he did,
What about housing?
affordable housing, yeah. We could monitor that as
Oh,
well.
good stuff.
Well, criminal, there not being a, is it criminal negligence? I don't know if the council would want to weigh in on that, but. Appears to be a problem. I think that's being discussed based off recent events.
Someone's gonna propose something. Just we-
Yeah, let's do it.
What-
We done?
What does
Nothing.
that have to do
Nothing.
with?
Probably discussion we
Criminal.
need to have. Is that a legal discussion we need to have, or what? Is it pending legislation?
We may ultimately, but, no, I was just throwing it out since y'all were saying other things for him to support. I think there probably will, something will probably be put out on that. We can talk about it later.
Okay. And if council wants to come back and I mean, obviously, Ms. Wilson will direct all this, but I'm happy to come back as many times as needed to have these discussions as to sort of a more specific ask list for the legislature.
Absolutely.
Do you all want to just send us some things via email? Is that the easiest
And
way?
all this is additive, or it's got
Right.
much of it adds on to what we've been meeting with delegation about. Much of it is. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on the delegation list that we share with them that is not up here. Is everything up there?
I think I went over that delegation list when I looked at this, and there was, this covers what we've talked about.
Knoxville Convention Center.
Everybody needs to put that February 25th legislative reception on their calendars. If we're gonna have this thing, the council needs to be there and politic on 2 or 3 of these issues instead of 20.
Yeah.
Decide, Kyle can give us some advice on which issues are hot.
Well,
I think we gotta focus on what we need. You know, there's a million people in the state all focusing on a lot of these broad brand. We really need specific, because we've got some advocates up there and we need to take advantage of it. So my suggestion is we huddle up and really focus and all of us sing from that same 1, 2, 3.
2 or 3 things, get all of us briefed up on it, so when the legislators come in, we can shake their hands and say, look, we need $40 million for a convention center.
I don't know if that's
Oh,
on my top of my priority.
Staff has done a great job, and, I mean, for those of you that have been present, we've put up, big boards on what those specific asks are.
Those
with
are
the
good.
bullets for the why. And we just, like you said, Mr. Ball, need to make sure y'all are kind of designated on which ones you're gonna cover.
Gotta read it to them, though.
Yeah.
They will ignore it
Yeah.
unless you stand beside it and say, see this
Right.
thing.
And I know we've done it in the past. It's participation on their part hasn't always been the greatest, and it's hit or miss. But I really think we need to consider going back to having an opportunity where we can have a discussion. The reception is nice, but there's no time for discussion. So, a breakfast, a lunch, something where we can, and even if it's not a eating thing, maybe just a meeting where we have an opportunity to discuss some of our priorities and the reason behind our priorities. What I find is that our delegation sometimes doesn't necessarily understand what our reasoning is or what our challenges are, and we talk to them individually, but having an opportunity to talk to them as a group with a more concerted effort would probably be helpful.
So
The year we
wanna-
did that breakfast, I don't remember if it was like 06, 07, somewhere.
Clarion?
Remember, we actually got stuff done because we had their full attention. They weren't running from one event to the other.
We've been meeting with most of the delegation, just putting out at least 4 or 5 I don't have the list in front of me. We talked about the convention center. We talked about just the DNA of the city, some of the things we've been talking about in terms of tax base. What else is on the list, y'all?
Ms. Reed helped create the list, the delegation list that the mayor uses, but it was mostly meant to deal with the
Todd's bill, to help people understand Todd's legislation.
But we threw in what we could.
It wouldn't hurt.
It went really
It would-
well.
It wouldn't, they've all gone very well. It wouldn't hurt to have, and we met with most of the delegation, with the exception of just a handful. It would be helpful to, maybe to do that, I mean, while they're in session. Some refused to meet until they had their delegation meeting in December or what have you, but that's a whole nother story. But maybe worth doing it during session. If it's a breakfast, maybe the same day as the reception, who knows?
Also, they could, I don't have a problem meeting with them as a full council, but sometimes too with our committees we have, depending on what area that we're focusing on, you may want to pick 1 or 2 who has that as a particular interest and invite them to one of the committee meetings. And sit, talk in here, hear us go through the issues with, with citizens too.
It wasn't on your punch list, but you mentioned it earlier, just to make council aware, the mental transport bill is proposed.
Yeah.
It has a huge impact on municipalities, on our capacity to deliver our core mission service to their citizens. That'll be, as written, it's a major drain on resources, which we really don't have capacity to even deliver that service now at what they're requesting. They have a police department, mental health does, and they don't participate in that transport. They push it out to the local and county, and it's an unfair burden.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's,
So it should be opposed as written.
Yes.
We'll get together, Kyle,
good.
on, kind of streamline some of this, and then if y'all could send us anything else that you want more specifically, and we'll look at some options for briefing the delegation. I guess while Ralph and Deborah are here too, we talk about every year, and I know now with Divine's leadership role, she's always had some leadership roles with NLC, but I don't know if that's something council remains interested in doing in March or at another time. I think you've said at March, everybody's there and doing meetings with the federal delegation, but let us know if that's something y'all want us. We used to do it. We've gotten off from doing it.
We need to go when everybody else is not there.
Yeah,
It's just too hard when
yeah,
everybody's there to get their attention.
yeah. So I don't know, Ralph and Deborah, if y'all can suggest some dates that might, we could float with council.
I'll share the House has put out its calendar for 2020, so I'll share that with Juana.
Okay,
Because it is an election year, they'll be taking
taking
a lot of
visitors.
district work period.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, because when Sam and I went up, I thought we had some great meetings, and I think it just kind of reiterated the need for us to start back doing that. I think seeing them here is fine, but being able to go there is helpful as well. And then in addition to them coming here, and we did that several years ago as well, and I know they get real busy when they're in the district, but an opportunity sometimes to even just, while they're in the district, bring them to certain things that we're having, just to reiterate the good things that we are doing with our federal funding.
Show them, and then we can still, I think, have some small meetings.
Would be ideal.
Smaller numbers, if it's a committee meeting or
Be ideal.
one of our work sessions dedicated to them. So.
Ms. Duval?
Mr. Mayor, I make the motion, we go into executive session for receipt of legal advice relating to pending and threatened potential claims, code section 30-4, that's 70A2, Constant Car Wash, receipt of legal advice related to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 70A2, legal update for 2019, discussions of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements pursuant to 70A2, Finley Park, 2221 Divine Street, discussions of matters related to proposed location or expansion of services to encourage location or expansion of industries or other business pursuant to 78-2 Farrow Road opportunity, discussions of the employment of an employee pursuant to 78-1 Development Corporation, city manager, and city attorney evaluations. Seconded by Mr. Davis.
Any, question? Seeing none from the previous question, clerk call the roll.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
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 So I thought we had a PowerPoint, but we don't. We just have a handout. We have handouts, so if y'all prefer to go up, you can. If you want to go ahead and go upstairs now, or if you want to stay, doesn't matter.
Let's stay here.
We can go up.